Very good news here that was completely unexpected. Can you explain the map news that we have out of a deep red state?
Yeah, this is breaking news out of the state of Utah, where that state's courts have just struck down a Republican effort to uphold their map. The net effect of this will be not just good news for the voters of Utah, but good news for Democrats, because it will almost certainly mean an additional seat in Congress come 2026.
Prior to this ruling in court, what had Utah Republicans done to the maps in that state?
All right, so they had gerrymandered the shit out of them, and that is a legal term. Okay, they had gerrymandered the shit out of these maps. They had divided Utah into a whole bunch of different seats in order to keep it from having a seat unto itself, because if there was a Salt Lake City seat, that would be highly competitive. In fact, it would probably be lean Democrat. Democrats, this comes as a surprise to some people, but Democrats have actually held power in that congressional district when it's been drawn around Salt Lake City, and Republicans had to do a real convoluted effort here between their map drawing and also their illegal efforts to overcome that state's prohibition against partisan gerrymandering.
Now, the judge came in and basically said that their effort to eliminate the Independent Redistricting Commission was unconstitutional as far as their state constitution is concerned, and then struck that down. Is that correct?
Yeah. So basically what happened is there was a referendum in Utah that put in place a independent redistricting commission. And the Republicans freaked out because, of course, they couldn't possibly have fair maps, right? They couldn't possibly want to just compete on the merits. And I point this out because it's not like a Salt Lake City based district is going to be like a 70% Democratic seat, right? It would be a lean Democratic seat, but it is a seat that Republicans could easily win. In fact, when that seat existed, Republicans did sometimes win that seat. So yeah. Republicans had the opportunity to say, okay, maybe we don't love this independent redistricting commission, but this is what the voters called for. This is what they voted for. So we are going to abide by the will of our electorate. Nope. Couldn't have that. Instead, what they did is they then passed a law to basically turn the mandatory independent redistricting commission into an advisory body that the legislature could then disregard, which of course it did, and then gerrymandered the shit out of the map, right back to that technical legal term.
Yeah.
And so the question that was posed was, whether or not they had a good reason for doing this, and whether they had done it because the state constitution required it. These were nonsensical arguments. They lost. The net effect is that this will not go forward. That there will be a new map for 2026. And that last point is important because there was a lot of speculation that even if the plaintiffs and the petitioners who challenged this won, that we would be back in the land that you and I often talk about, Purcell land, that it would be too late. But this judge set a very aggressive schedule and made it absolutely clear that there will be a new map in time for 2026. Essentially, the state said, well, we couldn't possibly have a new map because it needs to be in place by the beginning of November. And the judge said, okay, well, then we'll set a schedule to make sure you have it by mid-October.
Right. Challenge accepted, basically. A quick note for everybody who's watching right now: to support the work that Marc and his team are doing, which is fighting this fight where it matters in the courts. A small step we can all take is to sign up for Democracy Docket's YouTube channel. I'm going to put a link right here on the screen and also in the post description of this video. It doesn't cost anything to subscribe, but it's a great way to elevate his voice and his work. Marc, you know the question that I'm going to ask now because I'm a cynic and a nihilist these days.
I felt like I headed you off on your question about Purcell. Right, Judge, you got that under control.
You did. That one's under control. But now my next question, of course, is there a way for Republicans to appeal, or even worse, to jump this thing from the state court system into the federal court system, where there would be a probably less receptive to the pro-democracy faction's arguments in the Supreme Court waiting to rule on this thing?
Yeah, so I think that they could try to appeal in the Utah court system, but that is pretty futile. This lower court judge decision was facilitated by a state Supreme Court decision that essentially I won't say telegraphed the outcome, but left open the possibility for this outcome. And I just don't think that they're going to get a reception in the state Supreme Court. And I don't think the state Supreme Court would stay any map in the meantime. So I don't think that's going to happen. I do think that you're right that if I were gaming out what the Republicans are thinking, putting myself in their shoes, as difficult as that is to do, let me see. There's democracy. I'm going to put away the fire hose and I'm going to pick up a can of gasoline, some rags, and a lighter. Yep. Right. So now I'm an arsonist against democracy.
And don't forget some gold coins, some gold shoes, some NFTs.
Exactly. And I'm going to turn it into a meme and a cryptocurrency.
Yeah.
But okay. So I guess, yeah, they would probably go to federal court and say that somehow this entire process, notwithstanding the fact that it's entirely a matter of federal law, of state law, that it stems out of an independent redistricting commission in the state and that it's been ruled on by state courts, they could try to make some federal claim. I don't think they're going to get anywhere with that. I don't think that it's going to succeed because there is a strong presumption in the federal courts that in the first instance, because redistricting is a matter of state legislative prerogative, that in the first instance, we defer to the state courts in this instance, and the federal courts are to sort of stand back. And remember, the Republicans in Moore v. Harper out of North Carolina thought they would be able to jump this to the U.S. Supreme Court and get some purchase under this fringe theory, the independent state legislature theory, and it didn't work. And I just don't think that this one seat in Utah is going to really sort of so tempt the federal courts and the Court of Appeals and the Supreme Court that's going to really go anywhere.
Okay, so that was going to be my next question: is there any precedent? And I don't know if Moore v. Harper would have counted as that precedent that would suggest whether or not the Supreme Court has in the past accepted cases where their own intrastate map squabbles are somehow grounds to jump into the federal court system.
Yeah, so if you read the briefs that the legislature had filed to defend this, and essentially that they lost, what they basically argued was a version of that. They basically said, look, we love independent redistricting commissions if only they were constitutional, but they're not. They infringe on the legislative power of the Utah legislature. So it has to be advisory. It can't be mandatory, because if it's mandatory, it essentially takes the power away from the legislature and therefore violates the federal constitution, which grants legislatures the ability to draw maps. Now, that is a perfectly plausible sounding legal theory, except it is one that the Supreme Court has now rejected over and over and over again. And this judge's opinion points that out.
So I gotta jump in here, because isn't that a really, really dangerous place for Republicans to broach? Because if they decide that independent redistricting commissions are somehow unconstitutional, think about what states are currently operating under independent redistricting commissions. That would mean that the independent redistricting commission in California, in Colorado, in New York would all be deemed unconstitutional by virtue of this precedent. New Jersey by this precedent. There are no Republican states right now that operate under these independent redistricting commissions other than Utah, as far as I know. That may be incorrect, but our weapons here in this country that operate under independent redistricting commissions are all major Democratic states. And so wouldn't that be a really dangerous place for Republicans to insert themselves here?
Yes, but the Utah Republicans may not care about any of those other states. I mean, the original case that challenged redistricting commissions came out of Arizona. Now, that was when Arizona was a ruby red state, and it was when Arizona was one of the few states with commissions. But as you point out, there are now all of these other states that if you unleashed, you would essentially be helping Democrats. The Supreme Court rejected that challenge to the Arizona Redistricting Commission, maybe 15 years ago. Someone will put in the comments what the actual date is. And by the way, leave comments. I love reading the comments on these videos. So go ahead right now, like the video, also share it with a friend, but also leave a comment, because I do read the comments, believe it or not, that you post for Brian and I. But that was rejected by the Supreme Court then. And then since then, you've had Moore v. Harper, which wasn't a commission argument, but it was a similar kind of legal framework. But you're absolutely right. At this point, if the courts were to say, the Republicans in challenging the Arizona commission were right, the Republicans challenging now the Utah commission are right, boy, Katie barred the door what the map in California might look like.
Yeah.
You know, I would love to see what the map might look like in New York or, you know, in Colorado or in New Jersey if there were no commissions that were limiting what Democrats in those states could do.
I mean, is there a world in which, let's say, the Republicans do try to appeal this thing up to the U.S. Supreme Court, where both the Utah Republicans and the opposing party would both agree that independent redistricting commissions are unconstitutional, and if both of them are agreeing that they're unconstitutional, could the Supreme Court then agree as well and establish a nationwide precedent that we should not have independent redistricting commissions?
So the plaintiffs in this case wouldn't. They are the League of Women Voters and nonpartisan organizations. I doubt they would take the position that redistricting commissions are illegal. In fact, they just won a case in Utah saying that they are legal, right? I mean, the court followed,
Yeah.
the trial court properly applied the legal precedent which exists right now that commissions are constitutional. Now, you raise a good question. If that was brought back to the Supreme Court, whether from Utah or someplace else, as a challenge to them and asking the Supreme Court to revisit that precedent. Certainly the composition of the court is right now more hostile to commissions. I mean, that was a 5-4 decision. And Justice Roberts, Chief Justice Roberts, was in the 4. So what's interesting now is that, you know, you look at the composition of the court and you could easily see that being overturned. Perhaps the next time you interview Governor Newsom, you should ask him what the position of California would be if that happened.
Right. Last question here. Who is in place to ensure that the court mandated new maps are actually compliant with this court ruling?
So the court itself is. I mean, the court is actually, I think, going to take submitted maps by the parties and by the public.
Okay.
Because it, I think, wants to make sure it has the tools available.
So that we don't end up in a situation like we were in Louisiana, where they just continuously refuse to abide by the rules that were laid out so that the map would be in compliance with Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act.
This judge seems intent on saying, okay, you tell me this all has to be done by November, so then don't tell me that there isn't enough time for, you know, the regular process. Like, I think this judge is going to get us a map by November that is going to comply with the nonpartisan requirement that the map not be drawn to advantage or disadvantage a party. Now, maybe the legislature will submit a map that doesn't advantage or disadvantage a party, and that's possible. They may decide that they want to pick which Republican seat essentially disappears. It wouldn't shock me. It would surprise me, but wouldn't shock me. But I think this judge is not going to allow for a lot of gamesmanship.
Well, look, I am grateful that you have stayed on top of this issue everywhere in the country. Again, a small step that we all watching can take to support Marc's work, elevate his voice in this space, and give him more power as he goes and fights these fights on the front lines, which is in the courts. That step is to subscribe to his YouTube channel, Democracy Docket. I'm going to put that link right here on the screen and also in the post description. I'm also going to put the link to my channel on this screen, so if you're not yet subscribed to both, it doesn't cost you anything to do so. It's a great way to support our work. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
I'm Marc Elias.
This is Democracy Watch.